Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. Thank you for joining us. This is session number 29 from D365 UGME, User Group Middle East. And we have speaker Deborah Bose. And this is happening on Secure by Design in Microsoft Dynamics 365. And our agenda for today is introduction to the group and our past sessions, speaker introduction, and future sessions. And we have a one big event happening in July. I'll give you some updates about it, and then we take the Q&A. And disclaimer: views expressed are from the speaker and does not represent views from employers or Microsoft. Contest or demo data and lab environments are used for these events. Any recommendations coming of the sessions should not be applied to production environment directly and should be tested in a sandbox environment. The session will be recorded in Teams, and if you do not consent to be part of the recorded session, this is a good time to disconnect. And this is our group. You guys can reach out to us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and website using the QR codes. And we are 1400 plus members globally and increasing. And this group is supported by me, Umesh Pandit, Anita Ishwaran, Naman Alwala, group volunteers. And we have a YouTube channel, D365 User Group Middle East on YouTube. If you have wanted to check our past sessions, everything is uploaded to the channel. You can check there. And today's session, we have Deblohit. Deployed is working with Avanade, and he is a cybersecurity professional, and he is going to take us through Secure by Design for Dynamics. And Deployed, over to you. You can give a small intro about yourself and then jump into the topic.
Surely, wonderful to be part of this community and to again speak with such beautiful minds. Uh, before I share my screen and go you through, so let me introduce myself. I'm a cybersecurity expert with 12 plus years of experience. I come from India, and I'm part of a global team in the organization called Avanad, and it's a joint venture between Microsoft and Accenture. So it's a unique company on which I'm privileged to be part of the Center of Excellence role, where I do delivery. I'm an SME architect, as well as I am doing product testing and building the practice across for the Avanade and our partners. So yeah, I burn my hands, I test, I talk about the different things, implement and also operate it for my customers. Yeah, that's me. So let me go directly to the presentation slides, if that's okay, Venki.
Sure.
Okay, great. Let me know once my screen is visible. Just a moment. Okay. Is it visible?
Yes.
Great. So obviously, I have introduced myself. This is the logo of the company which I come from, and the reason I take a pledge of saying the slides as part of my introduction is that I get a wide spread of testing the security, not only from a security standpoint, but which is clubbed to particular applications, particular method, particular solution in place. Now, Dynamic 365 is definitely one of the spaces where I work with the Dynamic 365 community globally, with different clients and within my organization too. And you know just to highlight why in today's session, taking business apps or like secure by design for Dynamics 365 was one of the topic which I was keen to talk about. I mean, basically, let's look at it. you know where do you try to breach? You try to breach where you have a data. Now the data is either is in transit, data at rest, or data in use. These are the three key important pillars where you are going to take data, and business applications are the sweet spot. From the advent of this IT boom, like when you had, if you remember, the first social media application, which is now not known to the many Gen Zs, was Orkut, before the Facebook and everything came. I mean, the basically wherever the touch point of social media application or business applications came into the life of human existence, the data breach started. And it started even before that. Now, business app are the sweet spot. And what are the examples? Now, these are the examples which I'm sharing on the screen, are really the ones which has been there in the widespread articles. You will find this names about these data breaches, like the Yahoo data breach in 2013. 3 billion accounts data were actually hacked, and some of there were high worth individuals where there were some financial implications. There were some acquisition price by Verizon that was included, that was disclosed. So it included the global public account and the private account, which was under the Yahoo business. The Aadhaar card. So the Aadhaar card is just like, your identity, your national identity card in India. Now, that was one of the biggest breach of 1 billion citizens, where all their Aadhaar or the national identity card, which had their tax details, which had their other banking details, which had their address, and even to an extent, all of this in one place were actually breached and was in the dark web. Now, these are the examples of security breaches, and all these things which I'm talking about are some applications at the back end, which might be like Dynamic 365 plus some custom applications. Now, I'm not saying this were Dynamic 365, but the idea is these are business applications which were breached. Now, the financial implication, which was reported by IBM Data Breach Report, that revealed 83% of the organizations experience more than one data breach in 2022. And I'm talking about this like a 5 to 7 years of horizon. And some of the data breaches or things are not even reported for the mid-size or small organization until and unless it is impacting any government client of theirs. They get unreported. Things like ransomware, things like crypto cryware, or those kind of things where they lock your device, so those are not reported. Now, examples of long lasting impacts after every breach, and that's very important. We understand there is a breach and there is a way, you can just pay your attacker, or your data is lost. That's okay, that's one part. But the long lasting is that apart from data breach and your financial losses, there is a selling of personal information which can actually hamper the life of many who are directly or indirectly part of that database. The corporate espionage, the trade secrets being sold to the competitors, and those are there in the dark web. The extortion and ransomware. Did you, if you remember, there was a weird game which was very famous among the kids during the uh, during the period of coronavirus or COVID-19, when the lockdowns and the global shutdowns of every country was there. There was one game which I by the name of Blue Whale, which was kind of extorting and kind of playing with the mind of the childs. At the back end, what it was doing was it was trying to capture the motions, the daily routines, and try to come up with such a kind of a targeted attack to the kids who are playing Blue Whale game. The database that they were trying to infiltrate were the Facebook, the social media, some of the exposed data of that particular person. So there were multiple things. So what I'm trying to come up with, that data in transit, at rest, or in use, if it is leaked, the implications spreads just like air. Now that's all said. Okay, I have made you feared a lot. Now what's the today's agenda? The today's agenda which I'm going to talk about is basics to follow, zero trust for business application, the scenario discussion to give a context of a particular Dynamics 365 design that you live day in and day out and you might have worked on, and how does it actually map to the security things which are there. Now, what's new in Dynamics 365? Avanar's approach, or what I will say is that my approach, because this is something which I have actually catered or curated to, and how to develop a culture of secure by design. Because everything is actually made up of three pillars, and I always talk to this. Technology is made up of people, and then comes the process, and the last thing comes technology. So it's the three P's: people, process, and technology. Now, while I talk about anything, it will be covering the four key pillars: digital identity, information protection, application security, and cyber defense. Now, let's dive into the basics to follow. Now, while I'm going into the session, I won't be able to see your chat, but feel free to drop your questions. There will be a slot for you to ask me Q&A, and I'm pretty sure there can be multiple wide questions from multiple angles. I'm happy to answer those, but keep those questions popping in into the chat. Now, the basics to follow. Now, understand there are two different people or the two different team who are there. One on the right hand side, if you see, are the business user persona or the business, like the Dynamics 365 engineers, applications owners, and people who are going to be using that. They are very skilled in their particular area of Dynamics 365. They know their application, they know how to do the development, the customizations, the integrations with different business application or processes that they are confident about. But there is another team who are the SOC people who really know how, or the security people who know how to monitor and how to detect or how to guardrail certain infiltration, secure the data or secure the components, but they don't know how the business application works. What can be the different way of communication from one modules of Dynamics 365 to an external or a hybrid environment? No, this is where the sweet spot of an external attacker are, because they exactly know where the general gaps are there, and they try to infiltrate. And that's what we are going to talk about, that if how to blend the idea of the Dynamics 365 user and a security team to come up and blend together, not as a different team but as a single team, and make it a very single small steps from a baseline to maturity, which will make sure these kind of attacks for your organization or for the client whom you're delivering, or if you are the end consumer, is not happening. Now let's see what is secure by default. What does it mean? Because when I talk about this, there are two imperatives, which is called security by default versus security by design. Now I get asked by many of the people whom I meet is that there is something called security by default and security by design. Aren't those the same? No. Security by default means from a platform perspective, anything, let's say the Microsoft Dynamics 365 here, has bare minimal controls by default, which is going to be there. You either need to click on, or it is by default in them, because it's more of a SaaS application, and you might be using some PaaS applications where, as part of this matrix of shared responsibility, Microsoft has already safeguarded something at their end. But security by default doesn't mean that the myth is true. And this is something which came from long years ago from a particular forum where Dynamics 365 was considered a SaaS application where Microsoft is responsible for all the security, whether it is a logic creation, the data at rest, the data you're putting, how you're processing. And they were like, Dynamics 365 people are using the SaaS because we should care about the logic setup. Now that's a myth. And why is this a myth? It boils down to the very basic shared responsibility model, which is widely told by Microsoft and also by me to all my customers and friends. If you look at the responsibility matrix, which is there, anything which is a SaaS application still has three important responsibilities to be retained by the customer: the information and the data which you are feeding it with, or you're processing it, or the information and data access you're giving to the people, the endpoint with which you are accessing those data, or you're granting an access of the device to use your business data, the account and identities, the conditions you're putting, and the just-in-time controls you're putting in to make sure when, where, how, until what extent they can use a particular data. And that's important because that's still your logic, your responsibility. Now that means, what are the security by default features in Microsoft Dynamics 365? Now these are very basics. Now on the left hand side, you might have already seen that, and I do not want to bore you with it. But if you see out here, it's the basic encryptions or the basic controls which you either have as a single click or a well guided framework in your Dynamics 365, you know, spin up controls, or your standard operating process, which you know for sure because these are absolutely there even in the Microsoft documentation core to Dynamics 365. And you see things like predefined roles, field level security, security profiles. You will get a lot of OOTBs out of the box when you actually look at that. And there are plenty of, you know, modernization where some things get even guided by them when you actually try to put a role or configurations. Now things have matured in that. There are obviously encryptions like Microsoft manages database encryption, server-side encryption with service managed keys. So when you're taking a Microsoft end-to-end solution, there are certain methodologies or encryptions that comes by default. But are they really enough? The question is that what granularity is missing with secure by default? Because that gives you the main question, why do I even care security by design? Here comes the thing. You have a platform and there are some customer controls. Now the customer managed portions which you need to be sure of are the following. And let me explain you in 2 minutes because there are more detailed slides on it. Data classification and accessibility. The classification of data means it is not about only the high sensitivity or like that. It means which department should see the data, whether it should be masked or unmasked. The data which HR or can see related to your let's say for an HR module, or HR can see that if a lateral hire is there, what type of compensation it was negotiated, and if that compensation was given, if he or she is at par with the other professional in the organization during the promotion cycle. Those are the data should not be visible end to end, like the calculations in the back end, to someone who is not concerned about it. For example, if there is a finance data which should actually talk about that for a deal, and these are some examples which I'm talking about as a real life examples. This is not a fancy made up. So for example, if there is a sales cycle, and if there is a particular contingency, or for example there is some buffer in the price which is being taken, uh, now that kind of data is very internal, and that should not be seen by an engineer who is just doing a deployment, although they're using a same CRM or a particular tool which they have to understand that what hours can be funded by a particular budget that was signed by my salesperson with a client. Now all these things are data classification and the accessibility. Now are these only meant for internal? No, because when you're talking about certain application today, the world works on two things: B2B, that is business to business, because you have your partner, you have your small uh, group offices or group companies under a main umbrella, or you're having a mergers and acquisition, or you are having B2C where you're directly working with the client, and to some extent you give a project management dashboard or a finance dashboard with a different view to the client, and sometimes customizations can go wide. Now in the similar way, encryption, which is a collaboration and data in transit and data in use, the role based access control, there's DevSecOps, registry scanning, the continuous registry scanning to see the malware, if someone has uploaded something in the malware, or anything which is a malicious line of code, or a connection to the external devices. All these things, if you see out here, all these things are customer managed, something which you own. The data means which you need to actually make sure you're having a control. Now you might say that why firewall and WAF is important for us. It's important because when you're talking about a business application, our architecture can be unanimous. You can actually connect north-south, which means your business application can talk to an external SaaS or a PaaS platform, as well as an infrastructure which is on premises or within the Azure or non-Azure cloud, or a east west, which means it can be sitting within the Dynamics 365, but it can actually talk to different things like the Delta Lakes, the Fabrics layer. It can talk to Dataverse, it can talk to other logic apps, different thing which is not core to this only SaaS, but a add-on expansion. So you're going outside your secured boundary, which is a SaaS, which you are having the myth, it is controlled by them, and you're having integration points. So that's where the customer needs to manage. Now let's see a glance when I say all these things, which are the modules in Microsoft Dynamics 365 which can have a hybrid approach. Now I have tried to give you a glance of the different Microsoft 365 components and their IaaS, PaaS, and the SaaS elements, which you will be touching in either of the way. So if you see, I'll just point out some of the modules which you can understand where the external interfacing is much more. Like let's say the commerce module, which I'm highlighting here. You see, apart from your known SaaS and the PaaS platforms, you might be having the IaaS, like you use Azure for hosting and infrastructure need. And sometimes I've seen clients who are having multi-cloud strategy for some reason or the other, and they have a hybrid approach, which means they are having edge computing devices either at the CDN. So when I say CDN, means like you have small computing, let's say an e-commerce site like Amazon, or let's say in India, if you are from India, from Flipkart, or let's say Alibaba, or let's say anything like which is an e-commerce giant. Now the moment you actually are trying to buy anything, those particular pages and everything, those data are not always residing from a main server. If it is accessed, so what they do is that they take a local copy of that, which is a maximum visited web pages or particular order or items, and they put it, those modules, to a small computing device. So it's a way of distributing your application utilization and keeping that application small copy of it in small computing devices. So when you go and search what is edge computing or CDN, you will understand. So what I'm trying to say is that there are multiple approaches on the commerce in which they're trying to make it faster. Let's talk about customer insights, where it leverages a lot of Azure Data Lake and Microsoft Dataverse for storage and integration. And let's talk about certain other components, like for example supply chain management, one of the, I mean, not the most, but one of the most vulnerable and the most sweet spot for attackers to attack it. Now, have you ever gotten message from, if you're living in Dubai, like from Emirates Post, or for example any post office thing? It looks legitimate, WhatsApp or SMS message, but it's actually a problem, right? It's actually a malicious one with a link which is HTTPS, which is absolutely legit. Even there are websites which mimics the exact type of order details that you have purchased from a legitimate site, but you will be getting a message saying your order with the same order ID is getting delayed. Click here to reschedule. And when you click, your URL just opens and flash and closes it. Now, those are some of the attacks which are on the supply chain management, and I'll talk about that and how to protect it. What I'm trying to come here is that you are not only limited with your SaaS application, your integrations, or the way you're communicating, those path, the data in transit, or the path of the data in transit is already being looked upon. Then what are the secure by design components which we should be learning about? So you might say, Deblohit, very good. You have scared me enough. I now know the risk. I now know that there are certain secure by default which doesn't cover everything. Now you have talked about my customer responsibility, but then what are the pillars where I should start from? And I always go by this thing. Go with this acronym and keep it in mind. IAIE hyphen AO. IAIE hyphen AO. What does it mean? Information security, application security, identity protection, and endpoint. The first three things, which should be the baseline even before you think about putting your Dynamics 365 applications or logic even being tested in a staging environment. These are the baselines that should be there, and I'm going to talk about each of them. And when you're done with them, next comes the hyphen AO, which is availability and operations. Now, when you're having that as a baseline design, which I call as a bottoms up, then you should make sure that when your baseline with a small MVP, or when we say as minimal viable product, is ready, being tested in staging, that it is meeting all your secure by design components, think about the same thing replicated in the availability zone and how to make it into a cyber resilient operations. So 24 cross 7, you can monitor the known threats, unknown threats, and also try to simulate and see what is your backdoor entry points by which your data is not abiding your security standards or your guardrails and can be infiltrated. So what this is the zero trust architecture, which is being told by NIST standards and technology. And why is this here even when I'm talking about secure by design? Because secure by design is a concept which came from zero trust architecture. Now, zero trust architecture, as per the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is widely adopted because it talks about this particular pillar. Now, how do you adapt to it? So you have data security and data and security analytics are the floor and the ceiling of your secure by design. But the pillars who are keeping these two floor and ceiling intact are endpoint security, ICAM, the policy engines, and the protected resources. Looks too much? I'll talk about it in much easier way. Now let's break it down by jobs to be done. Who is doing this job? Now this is absolutely a mapping of who and from where these jobs will be done. From the organizational leadership, there is a board of who decides that what is the focus and the motive of my Dynamics 365 or a business application, how secure or what are the risks which we are going to be absolutely devastated with if there's a risk happens. And also they will define you that till what appetite they can take a risk and without being totally shattered. This comes from an organization handed over to something called a project management office or the information risk manager. And that's very important because these are the people who will actually define that what are the risk management and the policies or the standards that will drive your individual security or non-security motive to keep your application and processes intact as per their guidance, because that's where the three things happen. The intention for a secure by design mindset and culture and education of the people starts. The process which I talked about, the risk management policy standard, defines the process to be followed in security, non-security, legal, and everything which will be focused to the organization's needs. And then it defines the technical risk management that needs to be done by us as the engineers or the SMEs. Now let me actually give you the entire picture. The when the technical risk management are done, the jobs to be done by the two team, the Dynamics 365 team and a secure by design or a security team, is to start asking or mitigating the few things. The understanding if my privacy and compliance requirements are being defined there or not, and also see what Microsoft or generally with that particular module in the industry, what are the controls defined by some frameworks like NIST, CIS benchmarking, the MITRE attack. Those are the components which will be agreed between the technical risk management or the engineering team and the information risk management. Now, information risk management are generally people you see having the governance controls like ISO certification, PCI DSS certifications, those who day in and day out live and breathe with policies and standards. Now, those are the compliance management that should be there, which will be driving your requirement, translating that into a technical requirement. That what you should do for the people, the insider risk management, having a guardrail of your for if there is something you know done by your people looking a malicious email, plugging a malicious USB, connecting from a Wi-Fi, things which people do. And you might be having phishing email campaigns in your organization, which actually scores you. I mean, most of the organization you might be having or you have seen trainings which scores you. And so those are the people awareness. And these are the culture which actually drives the secure by design. Apps and data. So anything which your IoT security, very important. In your supply chain business application, there is a component of a POS, which is like the card machine where you swipe in your card, your QR code machine, or things like the billing machines. Those are also part of IoT. right? Or they're in the supply chain, the handheld machines from which they do a barcode scanning. Those are all IoT engines. So all those somehow, some way or the other, is fed with your business application, and that's where the entire magic happens, which you guys do as Dynamics 365. But there's a component of security which apps and data team needs to talk with the security team and tell, hey, these are my point of entry when I'm interacting with external party or something which I do not have a control. It's just that I'm utilizing the data, not knowing the effects of it. Next comes the infrastructure and endpoint, the network and the security. Your business application, if it is interacting with an API, it's going through a DNS query or through a URL. It's an HTTPS traffic. Think about it. It's exiting from your environment using internet and going to a destination to fetch a to give them a request, fetch a response. Now those exits and entry are nothing but from your infrastructure, whether it is SaaS or infra or IaaS, and then there is a networking, which is like the internet gateway. The endpoint security, if you are developing a business application which is available on a mobile device of your client which you have developed, then that's the endpoint. The laptop is an endpoint. Anything which is a machine like an ATM machine is also an endpoint. And I'm pretty sure you have done some application in your capacity where you're interacting with some devices, not only Dynamics 365 but integration with other. And then how to mitigate the vulnerabilities coming out of it. Next comes important, the identity, the key management. Because if you know, the secrets and key management are one of the still dynamics which is there, which in the communication chain of handshaking between your request and your destination is still a mechanism. So the key management, the key rotation, so that your key is not getting predicted by your attackers, or someone is not getting leaked unnecessarily, or not getting hard coded in your application, is getting checked, validated, controlled, monitored, and even if it is getting leaked or done, there is a mitigation measure. When all these things are defined by the technical risk management team and there are controls in place, that's where your first step of secure by design foundation is ready. Now you might say, okay, when it's ready, why? You're just talking about SOC or security operations. Now you have just done the baselining, and your application doesn't end there. It's an ongoing process. So when it is getting utilized in the BAU, who is going to make sure that the risk scenarios which is defined by organization, the incident which your information risk people has predicted might happen, or the incident or the attack or certain vulnerabilities which has already happened, who is going to take care of mitigating it, alerting you, giving you a way to just stop that attack, if not mitigate it at your application, but stop the communication so your business impact doesn't happen. All those things are done by something called security operations team. Now, this is only a persona which talks about that what these jobs to be done are by who or which people or how they will do it. And the last thing which I highlighted in green is a threat intelligence, which is equally important for business application, for a security team to have an intelligence that what are the ongoing tactical threats happening in the market, not known to you, not known to your existing security team, and to check proactively or scan proactively that is your environment having anything similar, or is there a possibility that your environment can have something similar. And to end on this slide, jobs to be done, this particular team with a Dynamics 365, the security people from apps infrastructure, the identity and keys, and there's the educational, the people awareness team. All these things are being governed continuously by a tool or a process called posture management. You in the Microsoft world, you have definitely heard about Defender for Cloud Apps and Defender for Cloud, a thing called CASB, and a thing called Cloud Security Posture Management. Why I'm telling about this tool right now? Because all these things of conditional access, secure scoring your environment, understanding the risk which you have defined and what's going on, the threat or the scanning vulnerability in environment, And giving an asset scoring is extremely done by these two tools hand in hand, along with the Defender XDR suite in total. Okay, well, I have talked a lot about jobs to be done. Now let's put the individual components by its name. Now this structure is definitely the same as zero trust architecture. I'll take you back to this. So if you see this, there's the same architecture. What I've done is I have mapped the Microsoft security products, the bare minimal secure by design products, which you should have in place to secure your environment, which is not done by security by default, just turning on Dynamics 365 and OTBs. So there are components which is now mapped here. Now the first thing, we all know security analytics and data security, as I talked about, are the floor and the ceiling of your secure by design, or even zero trust, you might say. But there are pillars who are keeping those intact from crashing or falling. I always take that analogy. Now let's start. Deblohit. What is the first step which I should be doing in my journey of secure by design? Now the answer is right here. You should start with the focus components. The first focus components you start with is a Microsoft Entra, which was earlier known as Active Directory. Now it is renamed as Entra. Now in Entra from the left, if you're talking about endpoint security, you should be configuring conditional access. There's another part you should be also configuring, but it is not mandatorily a Microsoft tool that has to be. But although Microsoft has its very good Entra ID SSCR global secure access client. So you might have heard about other companies like Zscaler, Wiz, Palo Alto, the SSL VPNs, Pulse Secure, Cisco AnyConnect. You have seen that in your machines also. It doesn't take, pardon me, it doesn't need your permission to fire up, but it fires up the moment you switch on your engine, right? I'm pretty sure you will be having some of the other type of SSL VPNs. Now, those work extremely hand in hand with conditional access because they will define what, how, and when and from where this endpoint, like user devices, mobile, or let's say devices like uh, like the machines, the card machines or the scanning machines, can access your application. That's the first thing in endpoint security that should be there from a security perspective, I'm saying. The second thing is that making sure your identity credentials and access management in place. So intra ID governance, which defines your access and credential methodology, the authorization and the authentication. So first you will be authenticated that yes, you are a legitimate user of this company, or you are a partner of my whatever the thing is. But whether I will authorize you for a particular module of that application, those are two different things. And that's a tool or an engine that needs to be there to to define that granularity. Now, that granularity of authentication and authorization is not holistic in today's world. Even if it is a trusted business partner, there is particular user and device which has a different fingerprinting. Now, let me take you an example, and this is a real example from one of my clients. My client is a global company who has its operation in three categories. They call it, and there's a different analogy. There's a green zone, there is an amber zone or a yellow zone, and there is a red zone, which means those are the classifications of the country based on multiple factors like geopolitical factors, based on environment, so on and so forth. I'm not going into that, but based on that, their access, authentication, authorization for a particular user or device changes. And that's only being achieved by a governance tool, which is like intra ID governance in this case. Now, with that flow doesn't stop because you're still on the Entra where you have to define the policies. So, which means there is a possibility that your employee, like I define myself that I am a global employee who is based out of Dubai. The moment I travel from a country which is a green zone to a amber or a red zone or much restricted country, my policies enforced changes. The level of access granted to me changes because of some policy requirements and some controls defined by my information security team. And it is not that they don't trust me, but the application which I am actually using is having its entry and exit through internet, which from a perspective of the company, that country might not be secure or something or the other, or whatever it is. Now, that's where your policy enforcement comes in. And the another part which comes here now on the endpoint security is the device endpoint or the endpoint detection and response. Anything you're accessing, anything you're accessing today on your machine has its executables downloaded as a .tmp or a temporary file, right? For example, when you're loading any kind of business application or in the web page or whatever, there are some images, right? The image, for example, there are some flash images, static images, the things which are loaded. Can you tell me today that are you 200% sure? Forget about Dynamics 365 as your application, any business application which you are using either as an end customer or a business person. Is it secure that there is no malicious code which is implanted in that JPEG image or in that flash image? It's impossible because attack happens in multiple way. Today even there's a QR code based attack which happens where people can implant a single kind of code or a QR scan code where it will still go through your payment gateway, but there is a parallel connection where their metadata of your transaction gets actually monitored by someone else. And you will see after 3 4 times or something, you know, there are possibilities that you're so what I'm trying to say is that these kind of things happen from devices. When you're using a business application and you're interacting with such dynamic things in the world, you need to have endpoint management or an endpoint detection tool who can understand your run times which is going in your system, do a device fingerprinting, understand whether your security patches are there, your drivers are there, whether there is a .dll, .exe, .temp file which is having a malicious code. If it is not known but showing a abrupt spike of pings or authentication mechanism from your device to an unknown place, track that silently and give you an alert that this is a multiple attack that can happen. We are unaware that what exactly this threaded, but it makes sure that you block that device and scan it or reimage that entire thing. These signals cannot be done humanly every time manually by anyone, right? So you need to have an endpoint detection and response tool, which is Defender for Endpoint. Now let's talk about on the right hand corner. Okay, I talked about Entra. You now have a Defender for Endpoint. What's there in the protected resources? Now in the protected resources, when we talk about Dynamics 365, we talk with Microsoft 365 applications, we talk with multi-cloud, Azure IaaS, and different other SaaS. So to uncover the shadow IT, if something is happening in the shadow IT, like you do not know that there is something existing and there is an infiltration or something being done, a spooky thing, or if there is a man in the middle attack at the application of the SaaS layer. So you have Defender for Cloud Apps, and you can even control with conditional access that your SaaS application and a particular user in the SaaS application can talk to another SaaS application in what capacity. To extend, you're giving a granular control. Defender for Office 365, because you need to make sure that communication channel of Teams and everything is also having a bare minimal privacy policy, encryption policy, and there is governed by it. Defender for cloud for sure, because you need to imply your your organization defined security controls as well as the benchmarks like the NIST benchmark, the CIS benchmark, the FedRAMP, depending on what the client's acumen is to your particular environment, and make sure that you monitor that all those compliances are met or not, and you will be asked by the customer whether those controls are there or the customer itself will be audited by federal internal or external company to make sure that best benchmarks are there, because those are the guiding principles to make sure you are secure. Now in the protected resources you have on-premise apps and workloads. So in the on-premise, you have either data and applications. So in the applications which is residing on on-premise devices, you again have Defender for Endpoint. Because please understand that your application is residing on an operating system or a virtual machine, which is having an operating system and a hardware and everything. So the backend operating system, the way it works and the way it is interacting, if that can be tracked on real time, you can know a lot of data. Secondarily, there's a data which is getting processed from the on-premises. If there's an on-premise database, there's a file share or a storage. So in Microsoft, you have something called Azure Arc, with which you can onboard a machine or a workload, whether it is Windows, Linux. You can onboard that machine on which your database is there, or your file share device is there, or you're having a storage. And you can have a Microsoft Purview module, which can do two things along with Azure Arc. Your Azure Arc monitors the real-time activities of that machine. You can do a health monitoring and do a understanding what's going on in the machine as a whole. But your Purview can also put the DLP policies to block, make sure restrictions in there, and to put the process on hold if that is not abiding by your controls. Now, another thing to understand here is that in the infrastructure, you need to make sure that you enforce the policies which is defined for your cloud application also to your on-premises. So for doing that, a very, very important thing is Defender for Identity. Because what happens is that when you're on-premises and it is integrated with Dynamics 365, you will be having domain controllers, which is more on premises. Okay, you might be having synced with, Entra ID or the Azure AD, but there will be still a dependency on the domain controller on premises. You will be having legacy things. So for that, there is something called Defender for Identity, which can understand if there are in an uncontrollable way that your uh, machines are on premises are being being accessed, or they are trying to access something external. Now when these pillars are done, then comes the data security, which is the floor, right, based on which. So please be sure that one important thing in Dynamics 365, if you have to think something, the first, even when your security team is taking care of endpoint identity and all, for you as a Dynamics 365 person, do not only leave the data security, securing your data by policies, to the security people. Be an equal contributor, because you have to define the data loss prevention points. What do you think can be the leakage points? What do you think should be the protection mechanism? You don't need to know the way it should be implemented, but the methodologies or the way which is sensitive to you, the use case stories has to be contributed by you. The Defender for cloud apps, because you're obviously going to work with different SharePoint, the Power Apps, the different SaaS applications. So you need to understand that what's happening there. The information protection, you have to give a particular information protection module the standard tactics or the standard use case based on which you should think that it is an unprotected scenario or it is a protected scenario. And then whatever resides in your DB or the file shares, you have to protect it by Defender for Cloud, because you have to block a process, you have to block a connection, or you have to inform something which is already going as a hidden vulnerability. Now, on the top of that, everything what I've talked about, whether it is endpoint security, policy, protected resources, data security, everything gets feed and have to be viewed centrally, correlated by one engine, which is called Defender for XDR. And Defender for XDR is a suite of things. So if you see, for endpoint security, you have Entra, but obviously Defender for Endpoint is going to actually be one of the portions. Now, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Identity, Cloud Apps, and Defender for Cloud. Now, I have given you exactly the suits which you require. Now, you might say, I do not need Defender for Identity because in my application or in my environment, I do not have anything on premise, which is okay. But I have given you a generic overview that when you're having a hybrid environment, then what will be the case? and just pull out the high portions which is not relevant. Like if you do not have a infrastructure on premises, then that particular portion goes away. But the other portions which are highlighted is absolutely the core pillars for you. Now there is a team called a SOC team who are going to monitor and try to come up with a fancy detection and rules to see that whether a particular attack which is outside business application is relevant with whatever the data you're getting. And that is what you call as Microsoft Sentinel, the SIEM. So the Defender XDR is the methodology in which you individually on the endpoint, identity, CASB, or the posture management, you do individual tasks. But if you want to look at centrally and then put an action, you can even trigger an action, trigger an automation to block, revoke, take an action, escalate an event, or do a modification by using Microsoft Sentinel, because that where the central intelligence resides, and that feeds in into Defender XDR, where if there is a particular device which is under the control of Defender for Endpoint, then Microsoft Sentinel can trigger an automation to Defender for Endpoint to block a user from a particular executable. Or it can actually say to Defender for Cloud that this SQLDB is not abiding a particular key mechanism or a particular file share policy, and you can actually block or revoke or hold that particular transaction as well as alert. So all these things can be done centrally from Microsoft Sentinel, and that's why it's important to have a monitoring tool. Now, very good. I have talked about certain things. Now, mapping the zero trust controls against attack cycles. And I have given this link, and I will request you to go and read this, because these are wonderful content which is there given by Microsoft for us to read. Let me give you that what I'm talking about. Is it really real, or I'm just scaring you out with all the fancy security products? Because I get a lot of time from my Dynamics 365 experts. They blow it. You are just a security person inflating and selling and scaring me a lot of security stuff. Well, I say no, I am not doing that. Had I done that, I would have given you thousand more things which are fancier, and I'll say it will protect more and more. There is no point of doing that, right? So we start with basic, and then we scale to maturity. And security is a journey. It cannot be, and it is an unnegotiable thing, right? How beautiful your application it is. If it gets infiltrated, you're gone. Have you heard the news of, I'll give you an example. Have you heard the news of MCP server, which is the new server with which OpenAI or ChatGPT can interact with anything on premises or other tools like the MCP server for the AI tools, right? Go and search it. It was uncontrollable. There was an identity threat, and there were multiple exfiltration or attack which has already happened. And people who were doing AI based model using MCP without thinking about the authentication authorization mechanism or controlling the API which is having data in transit, they are now realizing why the security methodologies which me or people like me have told them to be aware are now extremely important. So better, so I will, this is what I will say, that protection is better than cure. So now let's see the different attacks. So the identity based attacks which you see, so which are there in the market, the broad based phishing campaigns which is happens, right? The spear phishing attack using information specifically about a user, right, from a social media or anything. At a password spray, like you have now machine learning based engines which is there in the dark web, where if we know a bit about your data from social media, from your now from we have gone somewhere, and you have someone coming up with a lucky draw. Hey, so can you fill this up, or QR code, and you might enter a lucky draw. Your data can be quenched from anywhere. By doing that, they can do a password spray, and they can actually have a match. So the password spray attack is so fast, it can use a combination of 1 trillion password combination in 15 to 20 minutes of time. So just understand that if your combination is very generic, and if you're giving your data like that, so how scary it is. All these things are relevant. So how the attack begins: an employee clicks on a link if you're using a phishing of any sort. Now when you're clicking on a link and you enter your credential and everything, your exchange online protection, so then you're already in the path of that attacker. The attacker uses the stolen credential because you were thinking that it's a legitimate email, so from my company, which is saying that some of these are real. So my, you have your timesheet or your expense sheet you have to give in an organization. Or let's say my business Dynamics 365 customer, they have some supply chain people who needs to upload the transportation cost for a particular consignment, and they come up with a, and they see an email that whatever you have estimated, this has been a delta 15%, please review it and give it back to it. And that's a general email. And sometimes you click on a hurry saying, oh, I have to give that, that's the last day. So these are all motives. So there's a all high pressure motives with that kind of phishing emails, and you click that. The moment you click, and it is coming from your laptop which is already on single sign on, please understand, when you generally do, you have a single sign on today. Now when you do that, you're actually giving your credentials to a remote attacker. The attacker moves inside your environment, gain access to whatever there is in the device, and generally you might have, you know, Microsoft Online or Exchange or all these things easily infiltrated. And once they get an access, they replay that key or that credential again and again, and then exfiltrate ultimately to your customers or your own organization's cloud environment. Now, all these things from begin to attack on exfiltrate is something which we call as 0-day attack. This can happen in small, so they try to come slowly and spread gradually. This can happen over a period of 90 days to 120 days. And then when they know enough data about you, your device, and the similar things in the organization, they try to attack the right data and steal the data. Now, how can you protect it? If you see that this is again Defender for O365, under that you have something called Exchange Online Protection. So Defender for O365, Defender has Smart Screen, all these things are already given here. Now, which are mapped to what I was saying is that you need to have a Defender for O365 as one of the important thing. Second thing is that multi-factor authentication is known, but Defender for Identity, because it leverages your on-premise AD signals to identify and investigate the advanced threat patterns. Because if someone is gaining an access externally and finds out that you have a hybrid environment where Dynamics 365 talks to your on-premise servers and everything, the one way that you can signal it is A, you will be having Defender for Endpoint, and B, you will be having Defender for Identity who can signal and tell you. Now, if an attacker has gained an access and everything, still no one can access anything if you have a conditional access policy. So maybe that user who was compromised was not allowed to access some confidential or a non-compliant data or something which is in the testing environment for a client, and that has been tried to be accessed by that compromised user. But if you have a Microsoft Entra conditional access policy, uh, you will be blocked. Defender for Cloud Apps can understand that there's an anomalous activity happening in the SaaS, something which was not requested by you. For example, if you're being compromised, your device will show up from a risky IP address, which is not you. For example, if I'm compromised, my IP will jump, or my IP address mapped to my device will jump, one from Dubai, once from Somalia, once from USA, once maybe from UK, once from Riyadh and India. So it will jump, and that is an identification you can't have manually. You need to have a specific tool, Defender for Cloud Apps. This is self-explainable, and you can see that how I've given you a mapping of Defender for Endpoint. You have given a where Intune makes sense. Then also when you're exposed to an external party, you have DDoS, eavesdropping, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and how you can protect yourself, which comes back to my point that why a Dynamics 365 deployment needs to think about network-based security when you are talking about secure by design. And exactly DDoS attack, eavesdropping, that is man in the middle or someone who is trying to understand your what's going on in your transaction, like the one which I talked about, the QR code or a legitimate payment link, kind of eavesdropping. Code injection, SQL injection through an API, cross-site scripting looks like a legitimate website, but it takes you to a different website altogether. All these things are network-based attack. So you can have a look at it at your own capacity. Now, I'll be going a bit fast. Allow me a moment. Yeah, so I'll be going a bit fast and actually talking about, the Microsoft 365 commerce architecture, which we generally see. So this is something which you have seen in generally. What are those? And these are certain kind of the attacks which are there. So the phishing attack, the ransomware, the credential stuffing, okay, the API exploits, the injection of malicious code in the supply chain, so on and so forth. So these are the reference articles which are there. So like, for example, MasterCard had a similar kind of attack in their business. Dynamics 365, Dunkin' Donut had a compromised second credential stuffing attack. Home Depot, a big, like a Carrefour, Lulu, or Big Bazaar, a kind of a brand which has, the shopping brand which has a similar kind of attack. And the recent attack which is there is the Luma Stealer, which you can see how it actually infiltrates from a compromised website which looks similar to your original one, and at the end, how it takes the entire data out of it. So which cybersecurity protection do I put? Where to start from? And everyone has this question. I have a limited budget. Do not have the plethora of money. How can I make it work? So first, you have security by default, which is your starting point, and then secure by design is the end of baselining. So in secure by default, what you have in secure by default, you have all these things already. You have access control authentication for online services, which comes almost by default as a module in your things. Microsoft Entra external ID, if you're doing a B2B, or to some extent B2 in certain B2C also, you have external IDs which you will be setting up, which should be your secure by default, which you're doing. Data in transit between data centers, between all these things are there already part of the platform in Dynamics 365 in transit protection. You have SQL transparent database encryption. If you're using the managed SQL in Microsoft, it is there, and you get a basic DDoS protection when you use a Microsoft service with all these components there, like the application gateway. You get a basic one. On top of that, you have this basic architecture already, which is secure by default, which you have the permissions, you have permission tier, you have examples of OOTB security configurations, which is already there. And I hugely refer this gentleman Peter Rammer. You can go and see that within the My Dynamics 365, all the secure by default, how it is there and how you can actually deploy it. Now, one important thing which I always put as secure by default is Dynamics 365 for fraud protection. And Dynamics 365 fraud protection is so important because it does the device fingerprinting from where it is coming, the transaction payload monitoring, and risk assessment. And it is there extremely important. So it abstracts the purchase protection API. It does understanding of how the database interaction is happening, and it has its own module. But by the way, the Dynamics 365 fraud protection is retiring, on 3rd of February 2026. So that means people have to gradually onboard Defender for Cloud, Microsoft Purview, and Defender for Cloud Apps, these three components, along with Defender for Endpoint, to actually have a feature similar or more than fraud protection. Now, talking about how it looks like. So when you take a Defender 365 fraud protection, it also already have this particular feature called velocities, which does a proactive scanning, and it understands your external calls. It has a graph explorer which you can see what are the vulnerability or some of the things which looks like a fraudulent transactions. Now question yourself, are you securing the server infrastructure? Now, identity and access management. Are you managing your identities, role-based access, record-based access, field-level security? Is your information security like encrypting client-side data there? Are you having enough auditing and reporting mechanisms with which you can say that your Dynamics 365 user access or Dynamics 365 hybrid access or database access is as per particular policy and control. If like in the similar way, code security, application security, and key management. Now these are my pillars of questions which I ask myself, and I request my Dynamics 365 friends to ask before they actually think that what can be done beyond default, what they have not done beyond default. And then I say that if you have to think that did I reach the baseline control, then you have to be sure that you have secured your development pipeline, you have secured your API, you have secured your data, and you have secured your identity. And if you're on the hybrid infrastructure, then your infrastructure is secured, either which is coming under your purview, or you ask the secure by design questions to your infrastructure team or the third party whom you're onboarding on the Dynamics 365. Now this is very important because this is something new in the market, which is like the what's new in the Dynamics 365 protection, which is this very thing, Purview AI SDK. So in the Purview AI SDK, what's happening because of the AI adoption, there are multiple unknown risk which are coming, and the alerts are not very extremely possible in the traditional way. So they have alerts like inside the risk management, e-discovery of AI prompts and responses. So the way if there's a hallucination, prompt poisoning, or if there is any redirection, those are things which are getting monitored by Purview for AI SDK. If there is any kind of sensitivity level exploited by the AI module, or if they are actually hallucinating and giving you a wrong data or kind of a biased data, things like that are getting investigated. And next is that you're giving the co-pilots or the AI modules or the LLMs are just-in-time access, and you're auto-labeling that what data a co-pilot or a AI model can access at what capacity. Now, I won't bore you up with this, but the last thing is very important. When I talked about a centralized monitoring in Microsoft Sentinel, the new thing which is launched is Microsoft for Business Apps. So Microsoft Business Apps today, what they have is that they have now come up with a module where I've given a snapshot from my lab that when you actually query anything on for example, like finance operations or something, you can actually get the raw data of what's happening on that bank account table by table info or by user and so on and so forth. In the Microsoft Sentinel, in the Content Hub, it is an out of the box, extremely heavy loaded feature where it comes with all the components of business feature, starting from Dataverse, Power Platform, and all these things. And it's a one click deployment, which gives you thousands of OTB intels. And you do not need to ingest it any by external integration. It has this out of the box integration with business application, and it will be just a click. You enable it, and then it will start feeding it. One thing, the Microsoft Sentinel and your Dynamics 365 has to be in the same tenant, or in the same not in the same subscription, but it has to be under the same tenant, and you need to have a IAM access between them. And these are certain kind of the KQLs, or when the analytic rules, the data connectors, the hunting query, which is already available today out of the box, which you can enable for all these modules of the Dynamics 365. Now with that, the last thing which I will leave you with is that when you're talking about the journey of from your secure by design to secure by default, you do a rapid discovery by asking the questions. You do a cloud security maturity assessment, and you have that cloud security maturity assessment to see that with your existing tool, how much you can do secure by design. And then you optimize it, like add the controls, tune the controls, and make sure you've reached your goal by secure by design. And with that, I take a pause. You can now ask me anything, any questions that you have.
Excellent session, Deb. Because
Thank you.
security is one of the key aspect, right? So we don't know much about it, but your session gave us a very good insight on what are all the aspects security we need to take care of. Wonderful session, Deb.
Thank you so much, Anita.
Thank you, Devloit. It was a very insightful session. Yeah, as Anita already told, security is the one area which is rarely known to Dynamics professionals, except somebody is professional in it or somebody from Azure talks about it. It was a great insight, and thank you for joining us over the weekend and giving us insights for all our community. Thank you so much, and looking forward for many more sessions. I hope my screen is visible.
Yeah, you are. Your
Yes.
screen is visible.
Yeah. So next session is on 29th June. It will be on Copilot Studio Introduction and Copilot Finance Agents. The speaker will be me. Along with me, Andre will be joining us. It will be 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. on 29th June. And the big announcement, we have one more session coming up on July 11th. That is on Friday. That will be a face-to-face event in Microsoft Office, Dubai. And the session is open for speakers as well. And attendees, we will be launching it soon. Please look out in our social media channels. You will be seeing us further more details on it. It's on July 11th, Friday, in Microsoft Office, Dubai. So with that, we'll wrap up this session. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for your time, and seeing together on the next session. Thank you,
Thank you
Devlet.
so
Thank
much,
you,
Thank you,
Venkatesh,
Ved.
for
Venkat.
the
Thank
invite.
you,
Thank you so much.
Venkatesh. Have a
Yeah,
great weekend. Bye.
you too. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.